Hi, I'm Kevin Millett. Today we're going to talk about the digital transformation of a reporting team into an analysis team. In a previous role, I was a senior business analyst for a contact center in a large financial institution. On my arrival, I noticed that there were three things that I wanted to correct. The first one, and probably the biggest, were the reporting differences in the reports. Depending on the metric in the subsystem, you may get different answers for the same time period, which is frustrating to the user base. Which number is believable? An investigation would show that there were slight aberrations in the calculations and the aggregations, which didn't make the metric wrong. But it's still confusing and a very difficult conversation to have with somebody who you're trying to have believe that the numbers are correct. The second one was the group's overall operational efficiency. Nearly 50% of an operations analyst's day was spent generating these reports. It's not a very good use of time. When you're at the mercy of third-party systems, those canned reports need to be transformed into a usable format for your users. That translation process, if not automated, can be time-consuming and error-prone. The third, and a byproduct of the first two issues, was the group's data culture, which was almost non-existent. It was questionable if management were reading the reports. They weren't using it on their side-by-sides when they were coaching. Overall, there was a lot of issues with the believability in the numbers, issue number one, and because the reports weren't really timely, it wasn't easy to act on this information. So what did we do? In a digital transformation, there's usually a triumvirate: people, process, and technology. And in this case, that aligned pretty well. Our people issue is our data culture issue. Our process issue is how we generate and distribute these reports. And our reporting differences require technology to resolve. Let's talk about the benefits once we get to that point. With the reporting differences, we ended up scrapping the third-party systems altogether. We had a custom database that we had built from the transactional data that was coming from the production servers. Some of the benefits of having access to the transactional data is the ability to improve the reporting because you can ask smarter questions of the data. No longer are you tied down by the aggregate systems. You can get into the details and redefine how your questions are asked and answer them, or even redefine your metrics. So the first thing that happened was we improved our metrics and our ad hoc reporting because we could ask better questions. The other thing that we were able to do was remove the inconsistencies across the board, since we had one data lake that we were sourcing all this information from. So the report's consistency was there. Whether I ran it yesterday, today, tomorrow, 3 years from now, that number would remain the same. When we get into the operational efficiencies, we used a BI tool, partly tech, but mostly process, to facilitate the automation of these reports. Now that we had a data lake that this BI tool could sit on top of, we now could generate the reports daily, and we can make sure that the reports were consistent as far as format. We even had access to self-service options, which improved the operational efficiency of the team. Instead of coming into the role and spending half the day report generating, they are now free from those shackles and able to do more analysis. Which leads me into my next point: analysis improvement. When you have an analyst who's now free of having to generate reports and can spend those times reviewing, driving insights from it, you actually start to get insights. This process continues over time and improves with each iteration. The more historical data that you're able to review, the more you're able to bring it into your analysis, the better the insights become. One of the interesting things from this was the nightly report. Because we had automated the report generation, the nightly report, which had become a very laborious chore to generate, now allowed for the generation of the data to be quick and fast, and then allow more time for the analysis. So that nightly report, instead of being a spreadsheet printout, was now filled with anecdotal information about what had transpired during the course of the day. That nightly report had grown in its distribution from about 10 to over 100 people as that report improved. Now, what's interesting with data, and what a lot of people don't talk about, is what you can do once you have your base completed. You've removed all the data quality issues, all the data pipelines are moving nice and smoothly, and the reports and analysis is much better. What can you now do with this data? So the first thing that we did was we fixed I would say, an industry-wide problem with understanding agent and VRU data. So this is very domain specific, so if you don't really understand that, you can visualize this here. So you have what's called VRU data, and this is the queue that you wait in while you're waiting for somebody to service you. So you sit in a service queue or a sales queue. If you've ever heard you are number 5 in queue, this is where we're talking about. The other area that's important for reporting in a contact center is the agent-related data. And there is an overlap here. It's like a slight Venn diagram here, where that handoff from the queue goes to the agent. In most of the reporting substructures, these are separate reports. But in order to really have a good understanding of what the agent's day looks like, you need to have these combined. The problem is that they didn't lend themselves to merging without duplication or errors, or maybe a fundamental misunderstanding of the difference between an inbound and a consult. And we could get deep into that, but I'm not going to. With the custom data lake that we built, this was no longer a problem. So this had basically resolved itself. We didn't have any issues with this anymore. The second issue, or the second major resolution, was that we could improve other areas too, not just the VRU and agent productivity metrics, but we had an issue with fast busy signals, and this was a port utilization issue. And we had no visibility into it because the reporting systems originally didn't allow us. But now that we had a custom data lake, we were able to tie into that data and pull out the necessary details to give us an understanding of what our port utilization looked like. The system's cost from the telephony provider was over $100,000. We built it for zero. And the last, and definitely not the least, was the build of a data warehouse. So we had the data lake, which included all the productivity metrics. But in a contact center, there are multiple areas that you need to pull data from. Mostly sales. So we need to understand how many checking accounts they're selling, how many banking accounts they're selling, how many online bankings they're getting people to sign up for. If you build a data warehouse on top of your data lake, so now you include all your productivity and your sales metrics together, you now have a 360-degree view of your agent's life, all in a consolidated and well-built data warehouse. You can do things like the comparative performance report. What is the comparative performance report? This was a top-down stack rank of the entire contact center, regardless of site or role, that allowed us on a daily basis to tell who was the number one and who was at the bottom. One of the surprising things that we were allowed to do was to publicly announce this information on a daily basis. So you saw how you rate against your neighbor. This project saw a near 10% increase in any of the productivity metrics or the sales metrics in the following year. The ability to see what your neighbor was doing and the speed of being able to see that the next day made this the most popular logged in report that they'd ever had. So as you can see, when we started off, we came with these major issues that were at the beginning. And once we began to pick these off and resolve them one by one, we began to see the immediate improvement, and then we could see the overall long-term improvement by having quality data. Now, a good reminder is that if you are looking for a silver bullet in a digital transformation, you're most likely going to shoot yourself in the foot. This is a much longer-term process and it requires a relationship. But when done correctly, you can see how we turned a low-performing reporting team into a high-functioning analysis team that can bring major improvements to your bottom line. I'm Kevin Millett, and thank you for listening.